All right. Welcome in, everybody. Tuesday night Bible study. I believe this is our 9th gathering on the book of Exodus. So we're making our way. We're advancing. We're advancing like the nation of Israel through the wilderness towards the end of the book. So we just have after today, I think we have three more sessions planned. So tonight, where we left off last week, just as a reminder, we had Israel meeting God at Sinai, God delivering the rest of the law. He had already delivered the 10 commandments to Moses and the people. He gives the rest of the law and basically offers to them the rest of his covenant. That they make the agreement, and the people agree to the covenant that they will follow this way of life that God is presenting to them, and and then they're sprinkled with the blood of the sacrifice, and then that seals the covenant. And so then God, at the very end of our last talk, God invites Moses back up the mountain, where Moses spends the next 40 days with God, along with his sidekick, so to speak, Joshua. So we're picking up today in chapter 26, and in tonight's talk, God will give the rest of the instructions to Moses, and it will all pertain to the worship life of the ancient Israelites. So God, in these next 6 chapters, from chapter 25 to 31, God will give Moses very detailed instructions on how to set up the worship of the ancient Israelites. So instead of reading through all these very detailed instructions, I have actually a little slideshow presentation prepared, and we're going to go through all the different things, most of the things that God instructs Moses to do with visuals, so that we can actually see kind of what we're talking about, because otherwise it can be a little hard to picture in your mind kind of what these things look like, what it would have been like. And I think it's a little bit easier when you have something kind of to look at. So I'm going to try, God willing here, to share my screen. Okay. Participants can now see your application. Okay, good. That's what we want. All right, can somebody give me like a Zoom thumbs up if they can see what the screen is showing right now, which it should say the Tabernacle of Ancient Israel. I'm gonna mark and Paul.
I can see it, Father.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay, so Tabernacle of Ancient Israel and how it impacted the church today. And we'll see, one of the things we'll see is that kind of this original setup is somewhat preserved even in the Orthodox Church today. So what is the tabernacle? What are we talking about here? Because that's basically what God will be instructing Moses on how to set up and what to do. And the tabernacle will become the focal point for the worship life of the ancient Israelites. So what is the tabernacle? So now that the covenant has been ratified, God calls Moses back up the mountain. He spends 40 days there, like we said, to establish the worship life of the camp. So in the ancient world, communion with God, which is the purpose of this covenant, as we know, God establishes this whole thing in order to have communion with his people. It's made possible by sacrifices. So the tabernacle would be the place where these sacrifices would happen. So by building the tabernacle and getting the priesthood up and running, Israel would be able to approach God and be blessed by his presence, without being destroyed by fire, like God had warned them throughout this process of meeting him at Sinai. God will be extremely specific with Moses about how he wants things set up. So I'll give you a little taste of what we're talking about here. So this is Exodus chapter 26. Make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of finely twisted linen and blue, purple and scarlet yarn, with cherubim woven into them by a skilled worker. All the curtains are to be the same size, 28 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. Join 5 of the curtains together and do the same with the other 5. Make loops of blue material along the edge of the end curtain in one set Do the same with the end curtain in the other set. Make 50 loops on one curtain and 50 loops on the end curtain of the other set, with the loops opposite each other. Then make 50 gold clasps and use them to fasten the curtains together so that the tabernacle is a unit. So you can see why we are not going to read line by line through all these chapters. There's a lot of detail there. I invite you to read them, but I think for our purposes, it's a little easier to kind of go through on a broader scale instead of zooming in on all the little details and seeing kind of what was being set up and why. So, one question we can ask is that why so specific, right? Like why is God so hyper specific about what the Israelites should do? So first of all, the Israelites are not good at following directions, which we will see in next week's session, especially. So he's being very detailed so as to not leave room for interpretation. There will be no excuse for not doing it this way because God will tell them exactly what they need to do. Number two, God is sending the message that worship life is important, the very center of their lives. If it wasn't important, right? If God was just like, oh yeah, do whatever you want, set it up any way you want, have it, don't have it, do whatever you want. And it tells them, well, it doesn't really matter, right? This sacrifice life and the worship life of Israel doesn't really matter. So God is making it clear that this is important, that they need to do it his way, and that they need to follow his lead. And we'll see by the end of tonight that that's exactly what he's trying to teach them to do, is to follow his lead as they journey to their new home in the promised land. So the first thing we talk about, these are the vessels and the articles inside the tabernacle, and you'll have a better idea of what the tabernacle looks like in just a few slides. But the first thing and the most important thing, the centerpiece of the worship life of the Israelites, the single item that would lead them through the wilderness, would be present with them in battle, would be, this is it. This is the pinnacle. The most important thing in the whole camp is the Ark of the Covenant. So the Ark is a sacred vessel. It's basically a box made out of wood overlaid with gold. And inside that box, inside the Ark, were the testimonies, are the articles, the items of testimony of the covenant between God and Israel. So we have inside, what were those things? We have the tablets of the law, which Moses will bring down from Sinai. They will be placed in the ark. You'll have the jar of the manna. If you remember in that session a few weeks ago, where we talked about, the Jews being hungry in the wilderness and God sending manna for them. And Moses is commanded to collect one jar and to keep it as a testimony. So that jar will go into this box as well. And then Aaron's staff that budded. So in another Torah book, which is Numbers 17, Aaron, Moses' brother, is basically, his priesthood is challenged. And there are others who are not of his lineage that want to, kind of overthrow him and take the priesthood. And God tells them to bring, every head of the tribes should bring their staff, and Aaron should bring his staff. And they should be placed in the tabernacle, and they pray. And Aaron's staff buds flowers and like plants and things like that. So this was a testimony of the priesthood, and that Aaron and his family were the rightful priests of the camp of the Israelites, the nation of Israel. That staff, that Aaron's staff that budded, without getting too deep into the story, is also significant from a Christian perspective because it prefigures the cross. A piece of wood that bears life. Through the cross bears life through Christ, who dies on it, and then obviously through the resurrection. So that'll be significant when we get to the next slide as well. So on the top of the ark is what we call the mercy seat. The mercy seat essentially is the covering for the ark. So it was like the top that would close it. And on top of this, the mercy seat, were two cherubim. Those are angels with their wings outstretched, facing each other, and the wings are kind of like almost touching each other. And this exact spot, and the reason why the Ark of the Covenant is so important is because this spot is where God's presence would manifest itself. So when God tells them, I will be with you, and my presence will be with you in the desert, and all these different things, this is what he's talking about. This is where he's going to meet them, and that's why they will build the tabernacle to house the Ark of the Covenant. So this is the first thing that God tells them to build, and you'll notice that there's some rings on the side with these poles sticking out. That'll become important later. Keep that in mind. Wrong one. So let's compare now to our Orthodox churches. So the Ark of the Covenant was kept in not only in the tabernacle, but in the most sacred part of the tabernacle, known as the Holy of Holies. And so we have in the Orthodox Church all the same elements of the Ark of the Covenant present, just in their Christian forms. So if we look at the Holy Altar table, which is on the right side there, we find all of the pieces, all of the items of testimony that we find in the Ark of the Covenant. We find them on the altar table of the Orthodox Church. For example, in the Ark, we have the tablets of the law. Well, on the altar table, we have the gospel of Christ, which kind of supplants the law, fulfills the law, and becomes the new covenant. So in the Ark of the Covenant, you have the staff, Aaron's staff that budded. On the altar table, you have the cross, which is the fulfillment of that image, obviously through the death and resurrection of Christ. In the Ark of the Covenant, you have the jar of the manna. On the holy altar table, we have a vessel called an artophorion, which is if you see on the altar table there's like an oil lamp right in the center, a green oil lamp. Right behind it, there's like a container there, looks kind of like a church. That contains the reserve sacrament, the body and blood of Christ, that's used throughout the year for the clergy to visit people, especially those who are sick. So you have the manna of the wilderness in the ark, and in the church you have the body and blood of Christ, the food, the eternal food of all the faithful. So you have all the same elements there present on the holy altar table. If you look on the left, you have the same imagery of the mercy seat present. You have two angels. If you look at this picture on the left, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but two pictures on the left, you have an angel here and an angel here. They're kind of on the top of the screen, representative of the two cherubim. They're facing each other, looking at the mercy seat. And who are they looking at? Who is the mercy seat? The Panagia. The Panagia becomes the seat of Christ, the place where God manifests himself in the world to be with his people. And so you have all the same imagery in the Orthodox Church from this original tabernacle from 3,500 years ago, just now taking place in their Christian form. So very important for us to understand that. And that's the reason why this icon is here, the platitera is in the altar, to highlight the importance of the Virgin Mary, but also to show that she is the mercy seat. She is the throne of Christ, where Christ manifested himself as a human for the sake of the life of the world. So that's the Ark of the Covenant. Next vessel, we have the table of the showbread. So this is a golden table. It's made out of wood overlaid with gold. It has censers, bowls, and utensils on top. And on this table were 2 stacks of bread with 6 loaves in each stack, representing the 12 tribes of Israel. These breads were specially made, and then they were placed on the table every Sabbath and would remain there for the entire week as a testimony that God is the one who provides abundantly the material needs of his people. Every Sabbath, the priests would come and eat, consume the old loaves, and then they would be replaced with the new fresh loaves. This is significant when we get to the New Testament, because when we read in the life of the prophet King David, when he is fleeing from Saul, the king at that time, he is starving, he and his men, and they go to the tabernacle. They're in hiding. They go to the tabernacle. They go into the tabernacle, which is not lawful for them to do. And they eat this bread. They eat the showbread, which is only lawful for the priests to do. And later on in the Gospel of John, chapter 6 of the Gospel of John, Jesus' disciples are eating the heads of grain. They're plucking the heads of grain. This story may be familiar to you. Hopefully it is. So they're walking along the road. They're picking grain from the fields and eating it, which is not lawful on the Sabbath. And the Pharisees come and they start to chastise them and ask Christ why his disciples don't keep the Sabbath. And he says, Don't you remember the story when David was hungry and he went into the tabernacle and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful to eat? So this is significant in that New Testament passage. In John chapter 6, Christ, the bread of the presence also becomes symbolic of Christ in the New Testament. In John chapter 6, when he says, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me shall never hunger, and he who believes in me shall never thirst. So just as this bread was symbolic of God providing for his people throughout their time in the wilderness, and once they get to the promised land, Christ will become that sustenance. Christ will become that eternal food, and we will go to him to find our nourishment, both spiritually and materially. Okay, the next thing that God instructs them to make is a golden lampstand. So this golden lampstand, oil lamps, is a hammered piece of metalwork out of one piece of gold. So from one piece of gold, they would have worked it into this shape as you see it here. And on this lampstand, there's 7 lamps, one central kind of shaft in the middle with 6 branches, 3 on each side. And then there's 7 oil lamps in all, and they're decorated with different flowers and all these different arrangements there. It's meant to be symbolic also of it being in the shape of a tree, showing that God brings life and light. So this was in the holy place. This was also in the tabernacle. Everything we've discussed so far would have been in the tabernacle, which again, you'll see in just a few slides. So this was the only light source in the tabernacle. And this is what the light that the priests would use as they conducted their duties in the tabernacle, which was primarily to burn incense. It was always to be lit. These lamps were always supposed to be going. And so part of the priestly duties was to tend to these lamps, tend these oil lamps. They were never to go out. They were always to be burning in the tabernacle. Obviously, in our Orthodox Church, the use of oil lamps continues to this day, and candles especially too, which is of course symbolic of God being the light of the world, which Christ says about himself in John chapter 8. So again, this practice of oil lamps continues even today in the Orthodox Church as well. The altar of incense. So the altar of incense, this would have stood right before the Holy of Holies, which is where the Ark of the Covenant was. And the priests were to come and offer incense in the morning and in the evening when they tended the lampstand. So when they came in to fix the oil lamps, they would have burned incense and offered incense. And there would have been other times that they would have used the altar of incense here to burn incense to God. So this was only for incense. It was not used for other kinds of sacrifice. There was another altar, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that was used for those kinds of sacrifices. Again, this Old Testament practice continues in the life of the church today. Obviously, as you know, having been to church, that we offer incense pretty much at every service in the church. We would not on an altar as you see there, but through, in the censers that we have. And we sense the church, and we continue to use incense to glorify God and to a symbolism of our prayers, especially rising up to him. Now, God gives an important instruction to the Israelites in these chapters where he tells them not to use any strange incense. And what that means is that, in chapter 30 of Exodus, God will give them a specific recipe for the incense that he will require of them. And they are to stick to that recipe. So in Exodus 30, verses 34 and 35, we kind of get those ingredients. Then the Lord said to Moses, take fragrant spices, gum resin, onycha, and galbanum, and pure frankincense, all in equal amounts, and make a fragrant blend of incense, the work of a perfumer. So those are the things that were to be offered to God in the incense. Now that's important because in the ancient world, different gods had different incenses. They had different fragrances that were, that was their fragrance. So, it would not be proper then to take, the incense of Baal and to bring it into the temple, to bring it to the tabernacle to offer on the altar of incense. And there's even a story of the sons of Aaron's own sons. They come, they're priests. They come to serve in the tabernacle, but they offer strange incense. They offer a strange incense, and they're consumed by fire and they die in the tabernacle. So God is serious when he says don't use strange incense, because those in the ancient world, it was not, it wasn't like you could just go into the incense store and pick out whatever you wanted and bring it. You had to have the right blend, because that's what was proper to that specific God. And so it was not proper to take things that were for other gods and to offer it to the one true God. So this is the tabernacle. So everything we've been talking about are the things that go in the tabernacle. This is the tabernacle itself. So the tabernacle is the house, is basically the house of worship here, as you see it. And all these vessels and all these items were kept in this structure, a portable structure, which we'll talk about later, called the tabernacle. It was 45 feet long by 15 feet wide and 15 feet tall. So it was not overly large. And it had 2 chambers within it. So that's the picture you see here on the bottom. There's 2 chambers. There's the holy place, which is where the altar of incense, where the table of the presence was, so the bread of the presence, and also the lampstand. That's where they were in the holy place. And only the priests were allowed to enter into the holy place. The common worshipers would not be able to come in there. And that's why it was such a big deal that David went in and ate the showbread. And then the second chamber is the Holy of Holies, which is where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. The tabernacle, interestingly, it's made out of different beams, but it's basically a tent. It's covered with linen sheets essentially and skins. That was the roof of the tent. So it was built and meant to be completely portable. Now, what's interesting is if you look at the setup of a typical Orthodox church, and obviously not every church follows this exact paradigm, but you have kind of a similar setup here, right? Where if you look at this diagram on the bottom right, you have the central chamber, the nave, which is similar to the holy place. And then you have behind the altar screen, you have the altar, which we still call the Holy of Holies. And you have, of course, in the tabernacle, you have the Holy of Holies, which is where the Ark of the Covenant is. And we already talked about how the Holy of Holies and the Ark of the Covenant is mirrored in the altar of the Orthodox Church as well. On the Orthodox Church, we also have the narthex, which is outside. Well, we'll see how that corresponds in many ways to the courtyard outside the tabernacle of testimony. So God gives, again, for all of these things that we've talked about, we have just seen what they look like in the end product. But God gives very detailed instructions on all of these different things so that they, will do exactly what he asks them to do. He gives them very specific details. So the beams that you see, the colors that you see, the skins that top the tabernacle, all that stuff was told to them what to do. They didn't have creative license in this process at all. So this is the tabernacle of testimony. This will be the centerpiece of the worship life of the ancient Israelites. The tabernacle compound. So beyond the tabernacle, there was a larger worship complex that made up kind of the tabernacle altogether. So as you see here on the right, if you actually, one of the interesting things I discovered in my research was that there is a Baptist church that has built a full-size replica of the tabernacle complex in Timnah, Egypt. And this, I believe, is a picture of that. So they have recreated it. If you go there, you can go visit it and see what it would be like. So the tabernacle, as we saw before, is right there on the one side of the courtyard. And then outside the tabernacle was a large courtyard enclosed with a linen fence, which would be 150 feet long and 75 feet wide. That had on the one end an entrance gate. So you couldn't just go in from any point. You had to go in from the entrance, which would have been opposite of the tabernacle. And within the court, there were 2 important features, which was the bronze laver and the altar of sacrifice. So we'll talk about those next. And again, God tells the Israelites how many posts they're going to use He tells them what the tops should look like, what the bottoms, the bases should look like, what the sheets inside should be made of. Everything is told to them in very great detail. So the bronze laver, if you look on the bottom diagram, I know it's kind of small, but it's this little bowl feature in between the gate, the bronze altar, and the tabernacle. It's right basically in front of the entrance of the tabernacle. And what the bronze laver is, if you look at the top picture, is essentially a washing basin for the priests to use before entering the tabernacle or before offering the sacrifice. Now, two comparisons to the Orthodox Church. When the priests are preparing to serve liturgy, i.e. to go and offer the sacrifice, in other words, we wash our hands after we finish vesting. So we put on our final vestments and we go and we pray and we wash our hands. So same practice, right? It's literally the same thing that they're doing, we're doing now. The second thing is, before we can enter into the holy place, i.e. the church, before we can become members of the church, before we can enter in its fullness as Christians, because as Christians, we enter into the tabernacle, right? We're not held outside like the ancient Israelites. God has broken down that barrier and we go in freely into the tabernacle. Before we can do that, though, we are called to be washed in the laver, of which is the baptismal font. And you can see from this image on the top, it has kind of a very similar shape to our baptismal fonts. So when we're cleaned, when we're washed clean as Christians, when we are baptized, then we are able to participate fully in the worship life of the church and the sacramental life of the church. So we have the bronze laver. Then we have another very, very important piece of the puzzle here, which is the altar. Now, the altar is where the offerings would be brought and would be sacrificed. So in the worship life of ancient Israel, there were different kinds of offerings. There were different things that would be offered. So for example, that you could bring a drink offering. And it's not so much a matter of you could do this or you could do that. There were regulations for all of this. So it depended really on what you were sacrificing for, whether it was for Thanksgiving or whether it was, to receive forgiveness for sin, whole burnt offerings, whatever. You could bring a drink offering of wine or of oil. You could have an oil offering. You could have a grain offering, which would have taken the forms of like little breads or cakes that would have been offered on the altar. Or you can bring animals. And in many cases, the animal sacrifice was required, especially when dealing with the remission of sins. So there were different reasons to make sacrifices in ancient Israel. So for example, in these chapters, God will consecrate his priests, and then he will instruct them to offer daily sacrifices. In other words, that every day in the morning, there would be a sacrifice, and in the evening, there would be a sacrifice, whole burnt offerings. And a whole burnt offering, which is on the bottom there of that list, is essentially bringing the animal, slaughtering it, and then burning it wholly, like not consuming any of it, just burning it till it's not, till it's gone, till it's ashes. You had sin offerings, peace offerings, different kinds of offerings. So what we see in the altar here is basically a box, again, would have been made out of wood covered with bronze. Notice the things of the tabernacle, the holy place, everything was gold. Outside the tabernacle, in the tabernacle court, the laver, the altar, they're made of bronze, because that's where all the people would be. And probably making an altar out of gold and burning things continually on it probably would not be a wise use of that material. So God instructed them to use bronze. So it's basically a box square, a square configuration. Inside this box, which you can't really see here from the images, there was a grate. About halfway up, there was a grate there, where the sacrifices would be placed, and underneath would be the fire, would be tended, and then the sacrifice would be placed upon the fire and burnt. On each of the corners, you have horns there. You can see on each of the corners, and that would play a particular role when in the consecration of the altar, in the Day of Atonement, things like that. The priest would be called to place blood on these horns of the altar and to sprinkle blood around the altar as well. So this is the area where the common people, the people of the camp of the Israelites, would come when they would offer their sacrifices. They would come into this part of the temple. They would offer their sacrifices to the priests. The priests would wash in the laver and come to offer their sacrifices in the altar. Now, with sin offerings, so part of the animal would be offered here and burnt on the altar, and part of the offering would be taken outside of the camp and burnt outside of the camp, which that symbolism becomes important later on when we're talking about Christ, who of course is crucified outside of Jerusalem on Golgotha. So why sacrifice? I think this is a question worthy of our time. Why sacrifice? Why would God require sacrifice of his people? So in the ancient world, sacrifice was the way that people communed with the divine. So for pagans, in other words, like the ancient Greeks that we know so well, sacrifice was what the gods asked for. That was what they wanted. They wanted to eat and drink and smell the aroma of the roasting animals. At least that's what the people believed, that this was what the gods desired. So the people offered these sacrifices to get the gods on their side, on their team, in other words, so that they would get support for, the harvest, so that they could get, victory in battle, whatever it might be. They would offer sacrifices. Sacrifices were also important because blood, when you kill an animal, there's blood involved, and the blood was symbolic of life. So many times they would use animal sacrifices to do like divination, to speak with the dead, right? Because they believed that the blood of these offerings, would give life, temporarily to these spirits who had left the world and gone into Hades. Now, that's not what's happening in ancient Israel. In Israel, God doesn't need meat, right? Like God doesn't need to eat meat. I mean, if he really wanted to eat something, he could create it from nothing and consume it if he really desired. But he doesn't need those things. But he institutes sacrifice as a means of communion with his people. So what's happening here in ancient Israel is that people are offering things not to placate a divine being or to satisfy their needs and desires, but they are offering things of importance and of value to themselves, whether it be their own food, the bread that they eat, whether it be the wine that they drink, whether it be their animals, either that they would have eaten in their homes or that would have provided, milk and cheese and different things that would have been important to them, and to offer those things entirely to God. The sacrifice then becomes an act of obedience, an act of faith, self-emptying, and humility, to take something important to you, something valuable to you, and watch it burn because God has asked you to do so. So this system that's being set up here by God is really one of to help the Israelites to be humble before God's presence and to get used to offering, everything to him, which for us in the church is no different. As Christians, we're called to offer everything. We're called to offer our whole life to God. So this state of humility that God is calling the Israelites to will give the Israelites an opportunity to be close to God. If we are not humble, God will not approach us, not because he deems us unworthy, but because we will not allow him to come close. We put our hands up and say, get away from us if we're not humble. And God, who is humble, will listen to us. God will respect our decision to be far apart from him. So in the Orthodox Church, we don't offer animals, but we offer, when we come to church, we offer the prosopon bread. We offer the wine, which, remember, we've talked about this. I know we've talked about this before, but the prosopon bread, when the priest cut it and place it on the paten, it's called the lamb, the arto. So the bread takes the place of the lamb being sacrificed. We can offer wine, we can offer oil, and other important things to the church. The real offering, though, the real thing that God wants is our hearts. He wants us. The bread and the wine, those things are good. The oil, the charcoals, incense, we need those things too. Those things are good. But the real gift that we offer to God, the real sacrifice that we are called to make, is to offer ourselves to him, right? Think about the lives of the martyrs. The martyrs were like those ancient sacrifices. They were led to be slaughtered and to be there for their life to be like a whole burnt offering to God, to offer everything to him, to leave nothing for ourselves. When we do that, when we offer our whole life to God, he can transform us. He can make us into authentic humans. He can make us into the perfect version of ourselves. And that's what communion with God leads to. That's why it's so important and why we strive for it in our lives. Why don't we sacrifice animals? Because Christ fulfilled the Old Testament sacrifices when he himself was sacrificed on the cross. His blood, just like the blood of the ancient sacrifices, his blood opens the door to forgiveness, purification, and communion with God. Those sacrifices only work temporarily. That's why they had to offer sacrifices constantly. They were constantly offering sacrifices. But with Christ, that forgiveness, that communion with God is offered forever. That's a one-time sacrifice that, it's the effects of it are forever, good forever. So there can be no greater sacrifice and no more effective sacrifice than this. What's the point? After Christ dying on the cross, what would be the point of bringing a lamb? Bringing pigeons to God, right? To sacrifice the pigeons. It would pale in comparison. So we as humans accept the sacrifice of Christ on the cross, and we then in turn are asked to make an even greater sacrifice, like we talked about, of ourselves. So that's why we don't sacrifice animals anymore. We read about this, especially in the book of Hebrews here, and I'll read this little section here. This is Hebrews 9:11-15. But Christ came as high priest of the good things to come, with the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation. Not with the blood of goats and calves, but with his own blood he entered the most holy place, once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. That there is a reference to the rituals of the Day of Atonement, where the priest would enter into the Holy of Holies and put blood on the Ark of the Covenant. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling the unclean, sanctifies for the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? And for this reason, he is the mediator of the new covenant, by means of death, for the redemption of the transgressions under the first covenant, that those who are called may receive the promise of the eternal inheritance. So that middle section there really says it all, right? If the blood of bulls and goats are good for purifying the flesh, well, how much more then is the blood of Christ? So we continually receive that blood within us when we partake of the Eucharist. So that sacrifice is constantly being made in the liturgy, and we partake of it, and we are purified and healed and transformed through that blood of Christ in the Eucharist, the blood of the new covenant. All right, so now we've talked about the tabernacle. We've set the tabernacle up. We have all the vessels. We have the altars. We got everything ready to go. Who's going to do all the work? And for that, God establishes a priesthood. So we have here another connection with the Orthodox Church, in that in ancient Israel, there were priests that handled the sacrificial life of the ancient Israelites. And in the life of the church, we have priests who are the leaders of the sacramental life of the church as well. So God establishes priests to oversee the sacrifices on behalf of the people. Initially, only Aaron and his descendants were allowed to serve as the priests. Later, this will be extended to the whole tribe of Levi. In Exodus 29:9, God says, their priesthood, and he's talking about Aaron and his son, their priesthood to me shall be for a continual ordinance, so you shall consecrate Aaron and their sons. So the priests would be consecrated with oil and with the blood of sacrifices before God and the people. So first they're anointed with oil, and then they make a series of sacrifices, sprinkling the blood on the altar, placing blood on their own, is like their right earlobe, their right thumb, and their right big toe. You can't make this stuff up. This is what I'm saying. God is so specific. He tells them exactly what to do to consecrate the priests and to basically establish them as the leaders of the worship life. So God gets established as this as part of the worship life of the Israelites, and they were given also vestments. So we have a couple here images of the vestments of the high priest. So and God again gives instructions for all these things. So in the center image there, you'll see it's kind of outlines all the different things, all the different elements of the priest's vestments. So you have a mitre or a turban on the top, on the head of the priest. On the very bottom layer is a white tunic that has sleeves there. You'll see on the left, it marks where the tunic is. On top of that was the robe of the ephod. That's the blue robe on top of the tunic. And then on top of that, you have the ephod, which is kind of this colorful robe, kind of like apron that goes over the top. There's a girdle or a sash that kind of cinches that there. And then on the top of the ephod was the breastplate with 12 stones, 12 different kinds of precious stones, representing again the 12 tribes of Israel. And each stone had the name of one of the tribes written on it. The same thing here there's also 2 stones here at the top of the ephod. Each of these stones has 6 of the tribes listed on it as well. So you have here what the priests would wear, and especially when they were coming to offer to God the various sacrifices, the incense, and all these different things. On the right here, I included some Orthodox priestly vestments, and again, you kind of see that even though it's not one for one, I mean, there's definitely some similarities here, right? There's like a robe on the bottom, there's a robe on the top. You have like kind of a central apron, the petrachilion, which is this central kind of characteristic vestment of the priest, which comes down over the neck in front of the priest, is similar to the ephod. We have a sash or a zoni. We call it the zoni here. It's similar to the sash or the girdle. We wear, we have our kalimafkia that we wear, which is the priestly hats. Our bishops wear mitres and veils on theirs as well. So there's similarities, right? I'm not saying it's one for one. It's not exactly the same, but the vestments are not all that different. And so we see again this continuation of the worship life of ancient Israel, even within the Orthodox Church today. So we've seen now kind of all the different things that God puts in place: the tabernacle, Holy of Holies, the ark, all these different things, the altar, the courtyard, the priests, and what they looked like. So here's some final things for us to chew on as we consider these chapters in the book of Exodus. So first thing, where did they get all this stuff, right? Where did they get the gold? Where did they get the silver, the fine linen? Where did they get the oil? The tabernacle operated on the generosity and the offerings of the people. In the very beginning, chapter 25, I believe chapter 25, God calls Moses to instruct the people to bring their gold, to bring their silver, which, remember, they got as they were leaving Egypt. When they asked this, God tells them to ask their neighbors for all their gold and silver, and then give it to them, say, get out of here. So this is the gold and silver they bring forward. They bring their linen, their animals, the oil, whatever they have, whatever God asks of them. The people are the ones who provide it. Obviously, through God, God is ultimately the provider of these things anyway. But they then give it back to God for this work, of establishing the tabernacle. This is again very, very similar to how the life of the church works too, right? That the church operates on the good stewardship of the faithful, whether that's bringing the things needed for worship, like we said, the prosora bread, the wine, charcoals, incense. Many times those things are donated by faithful parishioners, or whether it's through our stewardship of our material goods to provide for the expenses of operating the church. Those things come from the faithful people. So same idea. And this is partly where our vision of stewardship comes from. This is how God set things up in the beginning with Israel. Where was the tabernacle? So the tabernacle, as I mentioned earlier, was portable. But whenever the Israelites would move and then settle again, the tabernacle was placed right in the middle of the camp. So, and there's a graphic on the right. You get a visual of what that would look like, right? The tabernacle is smack dab in the middle. It's right in the center of everything else that's going around. And on the sides, the different tribes were camped out, as tribes. So they were like organized by their tribes. And that's listed, that the listings of all those tribes and where they were is in another part of the Torah. So the message here from God is that that God and the worship life of the ancient Israelites is the center of life for them. Their lives revolve literally around the tabernacle and around God's presence. And remember, God's presence would come and manifest itself, and as a cloud would come and overshadow the tabernacle, and that God was at the center. The Israelites, think about this, right? When they would come to make their offerings, they would have to carry their offerings from wherever they were living all the way to the tabernacle. They would have to walk through all the camps. They'd have to leave, in essence, they'd have to leave where their tribe was, where their home was. They'd have to leave, their sins, the record of their sins behind, so that they could come and make this offering to God and be reconciled with him. And this again is an image for us of the spiritual life and how we approach the chalice to receive communion. We're called to leave our homes, we come to the church, we make our offerings, whatever that offering may be, and then we receive Holy Communion. We make our offerings to Christ, then we receive communion and reconciliation with him. The tabernacle, last consideration, the tabernacle was portable. During this time in their history, the Israelites were nomadic people. That means that they moved from place to place. They were like an army of God. They were like an army on the move, going from here to there, to there, to there. So everything in the tabernacle complex was designed to be carried and moved to a new location. And I pointed it out with the Ark of the Covenant, that there were poles, there were rings and pulls that were built into the Ark of the Covenant. And that was so that the people could go and carry them, pick it up and carry it. So this shows again that God expected the Israelites to follow him, no matter where he leads them, no matter where he led them, and that they would have to journey to new places. The gods of the ancient world had temples, right? The Parthenon is still there in Greece. That Parthenon was originally a temple to Athena. That's not the reality of the ancient Israelites. God is going to tell them, okay, now pick up and go here, pick up and go there, and they're going to do it. But they're going to do it with God at the center, and so that in that way the tabernacle was portable, so that they could, be on the move and take God with them and keep him at the center. Now, this idea that Israel would have to journey and go into kind of new territories will culminate finally in the transformation of Israel into the new Israel, which is the church. The church too has no, as Christians, we have no permanent homeland here on earth. Our homeland, as we say in the funeral service, our homeland is a spiritual homeland, the city set on high, the kingdom of God. That's where we're journeying. So just like the ancient Israelites of old, journeying through the wilderness, we journey through the wilderness of this life so that we can find our promised land in the kingdom of God. The fact that the tabernacle is portable also says a lot about God and about who he is. I talked just a moment ago about how the pagan gods had all these fantastic permanent buildings and temples and gold and statues and everything dedicated to them. But what God is asking for here is kind of small, primitive, and portable, right? What that shows us is that God is humble. He doesn't need all these great, fancy things. That's not what he's asking the Israelites. This is the same kind of humility that will bring salvation to all mankind in the life of Jesus Christ. And we see that again and again and again in his life, right? In the Annunciation, that he is born, that he's carried in the womb of some anonymous, teenage Nazarene, Nazarite girl, that he's born in a cave in Bethlehem, again, in a cave where animals were being kept, that he dies on the cross and that he's buried. Humility, 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 again and again and again. So that is my summary of chapters 25 through 31 of the book of Exodus. And now we have a good idea of what the worship life of the ancient Israelites would have looked like, and how important it was for them and for God, that they did these things according to the way that he directed them. So at this time, if there's any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and fire away. Otherwise, we'll depart for the evening, and we'll regroup next week. Any
I have a question for you, Father.
Go ahead, Mark.
Does the church prescribe a certain kind of incense?
No, not particularly.
Okay.
Those
I don't want to burn any strange incense, so.
Yeah, I would say, as long as it's, if you go to usually if you're buying incense for a church, it's usually from like a Christian, an Orthodox Christian store. It's usually from, a monastery. Monasteries, okay. Right? So like it's made for that use. You know what I mean? Okay. Like I don't think you want to go like on Amazon and buy like incense sticks. You know what I mean? Like we're not going to use that in the church. But but there's not like a specific kind of like a scent, or there's not like a blend or something. But if you're buying incense to give to the church, I would try to find an Orthodox supplier, whether it be a religious producer of goods, or whether it's a monastery or another church.
Yeah. My other question, Father, is sorry, Paul. My other question is, so with all the similarities and all the now I see a lot more from your presentation about what Christ fulfilled from the ancient Jewish traditions. Okay, how can it be that the Jewish people don't see this to this day? I mean, come on.
I can't really comment on that, but yeah, and we see these things, but the reason that the gospel of Christ is so powerful is because we have the ability to deny it. So
are they still practicing the same thing?
Well, they don't sacrifice anymore because the temple has been destroyed.
Oh.
They don't have a temple. So after the tabernacle, so once they settle in Jerusalem, they build the temple. Solomon builds the temple.
Oh, that's right.
Now becomes the new house of sacrifice in Israel. That was the only place they could go to sacrifice. There were not multiple temples. There were multiple synagogues, but the synagogues was for hearing of the scriptures and the teachings. It was not for sacrifice. If you wanted to make sacrifice, you had to go to the temple in Jerusalem.
Okay.
The temple is destroyed. Even the second temple is destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. First, it's destroyed by the Babylonians. Then they rebuilt the temple, and it's destroyed again by the Romans. And since that time, it hasn't been rebuilt. So
no place. Okay.
There's no sacrifice. They still keep the feasts. They keep the Passover. They keep different feasts, but they don't offer sacrifice anymore.
Well, thank you so much, Father, because it was a wonderful irony. But this morning I read in the devotional Leviticus, and I'm like, I don't understand what all this looks like. I was wondering, and it was wonderful to see that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So there's even more. Like as you read the Torah, there's even like more regulation. There's like God adds. There's like more layers to it. So like God talks about the different kinds of sacrifices and what you need to bring, and what needs to be burned on the altar, and what gets burned outside. There's like all kinds of regulations. So there's actually a lot more if you keep reading the Torah. Any other questions? Alrighty, sounds good. Thank you all. God bless. We'll regroup next week, and next week is the golden calf, so that should be fun too. So all right, have a good night. God bless, and
thank you, Father.
See you all.
Thank you.